Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate that. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another work group meeting. So the first item on the agenda, I believe I actually added. We find out this particular environment variable. We have users using them, so we actually been having some offline discussion with Rama, and I don't believe there is a way to handle this without this function restored or have it in a proper API. So what we are thinking is revert this, adding back this particular environment variable, and also working with community to maybe have a design doc to figure out what's the right API for this type of scenario. So I think, Greg, you already opened a PR about adding this back. I just want to mention this to community in case anybody have any concerns.
It looks like this environment variable was removed just as like a tech deck cleanup. There wasn't a particular feature that needed it removed or causing problems for anyone.
Yeah, so Carsten, you were asking which environment variable. Yeah, so this particular PR 37374, if you click on that link, it actually removed two of the environment variables. And interestingly enough, on the very next day, one of the environment variable was already being restored because somebody needs it. What we are discussing is the second environment variable that's been removed by this PI, which is pilot enable Kubernetes select workload entries.
Oh, that one. And someone was turning it to false for some reason?
Yeah, we have user setting it to false.
What was the purpose?
Yeah, so I think the purpose, if I understood correctly, was he was creating service entry which selects both Kubernetes service and also a workload entry that corresponding to a remote service, maybe could be from another Kubernetes cluster, and then he wants to kind of refer to that particular service using the hostname defined in the service entry was the particular Kubernetes assigned names.
I see. I did a bit of research recently on service entry and also corner cases, and I was going to write a doc about this. I mean, I don't mind reverting it for now because we have customers depending on it, but there are some behavior in service entries that are particularly confusing, bad, and where the technical debt keeps accumulating. Especially since the gateway API is kind of using services for subset. It's becoming very confusing between the service entry for egress, service entry for defining service for service basically, and all kind of arcane uses of service entries that are that like this one where you represent external entries for some reason. I'm worried that, well, nothing we can do. I mean, if we have customers, we need to understand. I mean, we cannot break them, but at some point we need to do a cleanup. I don't know how.
Yeah, so Carsten, so maybe it would be good when you have your doc ready. It would be good to share with us. And Rob, I think you made an interesting comment on define the user case and desire behavior. So we probably should be doing that so we can, make sure people understand the scenarios. John?
Yeah, sorry, 1 second. My proposal boils down to stop using service entry for defining internal objects. I mean, the internal mesh and all the other stuff, we have workload loop, workload entry, keep service entry for egress only, and use service plus workload entry for internal stuff. It's a bit drastic. I mean, I was going to propose different intermediary steps, but we have a lot of problems with the confusion between service entry used for egress and for defining local kind of service replacement. John, sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna respond on like the general issue. I think like as a one-off, it's fine. We can revert this PR, but this is kind of a sign of a process failure. Like as maintainers of Istio, you should not be depending on flags which are explicitly marked as temporary. If you do depend on the features, we should have figured this out a year ago when we've introduced them, that like, hey, I need this thing that's temporary. How do we make it permanent? What's the proper API? How do we clean up the tech debt around here if we do depend on it, that type of thing. So I find as like a one-off thing here, but this is definitely a sign that something went wrong here. If you're depending on feature flags long-term, speak now because you will be broken.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess one thing it wasn't obvious was I think when the feature flag was removed, it wasn't on the README of the release. So people didn't realize until they run it. So not something people catch when they actually saw the release changes. So
one proposal that was made in the past was that at startup or at install time, pilot should log all the environment variables that are used, because no environment variable is effectively an API. We agreed that, and it's a way to introduce temporary stuff. It's definitely not something that it's intended as an API surface that we guarantee support and long-term maintenance. In particular for things like this, which are kind of weird behaviors. So it's not, we don't need to deprecate, we don't promote them to stable, and we need to stop users from using experimental internal flags or things that are not supposed to be part of the API surface, because it's not only this one, there are hundreds of others that are problematic.
yeah, so I agree with the concerns here. I think if this function is important, someone needs to take it forward with the proper design doc and proper documentation of the user case and scenarios, and also find a proper home. I think the consensus here is also restore this function for Istio 114 and master before we find a good solution. And Rob, did you want to mention something? You've been pretty active in the chat, which I agree with all your comments.
I mean, sure. Well, I guess I'm talking now, so sure. I just think process-wise, I think it's fine to delete this stuff, and it's marked as experimental or whatever. But I think it's also good to give users a heads up, like, hey, we're going to be deleting this in the next release, so you've got some time to make accommodations. And yeah, I understand what you're saying, Kostin, about deprecating things that might be internal or experimental, but at least if they're put on a plan like, hey, these are going away, then users at least have a couple months to be like, okay, I need to clean up my act and figure out a way around it. Because right, it cuts kind of both ways, right? It's experimental, you use it at your own risk, it might disappear anyway. If it's internal, I kind of awesome, like, it's internal, sorry, you're at risk of being broken if you're relying on internal features. But it's hard to document and know for some of this stuff, and people are trying to implement use cases in ways that might not be. But I think at least for experimental things, we can give folks a heads up. That's just my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth.
One quick question. What happened with that flag that was enabling secure verification by default? I was just looking at this and remember that we introduced a flag where we do the validation for the security issue, and that was an example of flags that at some point we need to turn it on and remove as well, because probably we don't want to keep it off. But
Which
I was wondering
which flag is that?
I don't remember the name of the flag. It was intended to do. You remember when for external sites we don't validate the SNI, the secure naming. So the name of the external. I'll look it up. But what I was trying to get at is at some point we'll need to draw a line and to provide a flag or some way for people to opt in into safe behavior or long-term supported, and maybe combine multiple changes together so they have one migration instead of having to every release to get some variables off. So if we introduce a Istio safe, Istio production, Istio whatever, then we can combine in that it will be opt-in, and users will get all those environment variables and all things kind of removed from functionality, so they can set them. Actually, I don't know if it makes sense or not, but kind of an Istio
I think
where we only keep the stable APIs and we kind of disable use of alpha and unsupported.
Yeah, and I think Rob's comment is still valid, right? Give people a window to respond so we can get feedback. You know, we can get the feedback properly when we are remove the experimental feature. Because the point of experimental is to put out there to get feedback, right? So if we just remove them without getting sufficient feedback. Well, there's two hands. I want to have Mitch. I don't know who actually. Let me open the queue. Rob, go ahead.
I think that's great to get feedback, but right at the end of the day, it's the maintainers that are making a decision, and hopefully they'll, you know, incorporate that. But, you know, maintainers are balancing user features that may be experimental with other aspects of the project. So just because I think the challenge there is like, just because a bunch of people come and say, hey, we were relying on this, you should keep it. You know, maybe that's a sign that, hey, the experiment was a success, but, you know, it's not working for us long term. So let's take those use cases and find a, you know, long-term way to support those use cases. So like as Kostin was mentioning earlier, for the, you know, to give a concrete example, right, for this case is, you know, instead of using service entries plus, you know, pod and workload selectors, use Kubernetes service and use the workload resources to opt those external workloads into local services, which to me, at least for this case, seems very reasonable.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
I think there are two processes that could have helped us in this particular case. The first is that pull requests like this really ought to include release notes. This particular pull request was labeled with release notes 1 or none, sorry. So just as a note, if you're reviewing PRs, err on the side of asking submitters to include release notes and removing that label, so that way users who are upgrading to 1.14 could at least see this in advance before they install 1.14 and find that it's no longer effective. The second is we've had for some time a design around allowing users to see what experimental features they're using to understand their risk profile before upgrading, get an idea of what could possibly break. That would raise the visibility of something like this. I'm not sure that all users who make use of this are necessarily going to be aware of the risk that they're taking on by adopting something. Of course, we all know that it's experimental. We all know that environment variables are not meant to be supported long-term, but that may not be visible to the users. So we've had in the UX group a design for this for a while. It's just been unstaffed. So if there's interest in pursuing this and staffing to support it, giving the users sort of like a pre-check command that could say, here are all the alpha or experimental features you're using that are not guaranteed to work after upgrade, could be valuable.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely start with release notes because that's the effort 0 for us. And Kostin and Rob, certainly, you know, as we restore this back, I'd like to understand what are the alternatives that you were talking about. I don't think I fully understood at the moment. You know, without using this parameter, can you do global host?
If you create a service with you know, selector, it should work the same way. I mean, the service entity with selector is the same with the service with selector, or should be.
But can you give that service a particular name that let's say you can call it like reviews.mycompany.com instead of the Kubernetes assigned service name?
That's the problem with I mean, what I was trying to solve in the first place. The problem is that in service entry, you can create both external names and internal names. If you want an external name, you are more or less in the case of an egress. I mean, it should be an egress situation. If you have example.com, it's not really an internal service because internal services are cluster local. And we have this confusion between, example.com being a so-called internal service with that we create in DNS for just to hack it, and the real internal service. In other words, there is no what is a use case for having an internal service called example.com in Kubernetes?
Well, it's so for one thing, what I've heard is, what if I want to call that services regardless where I am? So if I'm outside of Kubernetes, if I'm inside of the Kubernetes, I don't have to change my code to call that particular service, right? So I can always use in this particular service name,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, we'll just give me example.com, but whatever name the company or the customer prefers, instead of reviews.default.service.local, which is only specific to the Kubernetes cluster. So if I'm running outside of that cluster, I would have to change my code or maybe an environment variable or my configuration that may not be desired.
Yeah, no, but I think this is a use case for egress. So you have example.com, we treat it as an egress because example.com normally is an outside, and we can use egress rules to redirect to an internal service. That I think would use the proper way.
Yeah, but what about inside of the cluster? Do they call it differently? Like, do they have to call their local?
No, they call example.com. It goes through the egress path, just like google.com. But then in the egress routing, we specify that this goes to my service or another service.cluster.local.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
That would be the normal expectation for, all the external sites are treated as egress, and egress, obviously, google.com, you can redirect it to an internal service as well. That's kind of one of the use cases for egress.
Yeah, I guess it introduced the extra hop for internal. I guess that's the thing. For inside of the cluster, I'm paying for the actual hop to go through the gateway.
But it doesn't have to be through egress gateway. I mean, the point is that our egress is kind of a mess today because you don't have to use egress gateway. It can be just the egress routing that we do. So it's kind of generally the same code, really, probably. John, is it accurate? I mean, can we do that too? If we treat it as an external service and route it to the internal?
I only captured some of that, so maybe. I do know that when I was looking at this stuff, it's hard to tell what a service entry is. Like, I can logically look at one and think, okay, that's google.com. That's obviously external. But if you actually want to do that in code, it's quite a bit trickier. I don't know if that helps at all, but sorry that I wasn't paying close attention.
Yeah, not to design on the fly here, but if the use case is I've got some sort of, host name that's, global to my domain or whatever that I'm routing for, and I don't want to have the extra hop of coming to an ingress gateway for that host name. And I just want, if it's external, it goes to the external workload. If it's coming from the cluster, it goes to either a local service or the external workload. I mean, you have a virtual service that looks for that host name, routes it, to the local service. You've got the workload entry attached to the service, and it'll get split between local pods and external pod. Right, Don? Doesn't that sound feasible? I think what's missing here is like a written out use case for here's what I'm trying to do so that someone could actually go and do a design around it. Because I think I'm inferring certain things. I'm going to guess other people are inferring, whatever their idea of this potential use case is.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's follow up with that, Rob. I'll put the comments you made, maybe as a starting point, is making sure, we have that. And Costin, if you have any thoughts on service entry limitations, please do share with me and other people in the community who are interested. And then in the meantime, I think everyone agrees to restore this as we iterate on the user scenario and potential design for this. With that, I think we've spent enough time on this topic. I would like to turn it over to the next topic, which is RC policy on TCP ports.
Yeah, so I will share my screen on this.
Thanks.
So for this topic, we're going to discuss about a behavior of OTZ deny policy, which we think is not correct. So to give you a background on this, so when we create OTZ policy, we create a network filter and HTTP filter, and all our like TCP ports, they rely on TCP filters, the config generated from the TCP filter. So the problem is when we apply any L7, when we apply any deny OTZ policy which has just the pure L7 rules, which means just the HTTP fields, example like path, host, or method. In that case, any TCP port which lies under the scope of that policy, all the traffic to that port will be rejected. So if you see this example, so in this example, we are applying this policy in the namespace foo, and it's a deny policy. And in the rule, we have the request principal and the method. So it is, so both the fields in the source and operation are HTTP fields. So that means when we apply this policy, the config generated by the TCP filter will look something like this. So in this, you can see the permission, it's true for anything, and the principal, it's true for anything. So that means any request comes to any TCP port, it will be denied, but it shouldn't happen. So let's think about a scenario when you have some HTTP services running and you apply this kind of policy that is working fine, but now you added some MySQL or Redis instance to that which supports TCP protocol. In that case, all the traffic to that MySQL or Redis will be broken. So this we think is not a correct option to go for. Users can resolve this issue just by adding the port level details in their rules. So for example, if you consider this policy, if you add a port level detail with the methods, then it won't be applied to all the TCP port. It will be just applied to the port 9000. This is happening because the TCP filter, it is not able to understand the HTTP rules. And once it is not able to understand the deny policy as a restrictive mechanism, it is denying everything. So this is the other kind of example. So in this example, you have two different rules. One has like just HTTP, and other one is like like the TCP field. So in this case as well, so since OTZ policy like rely on rules before doing this, so one of the rule has just the HTTP semantics. If any of the rule matches in the deny policy, it will just deny it. So the first rule matches and it will deny everything. So this is a table which shows like for TCP ports, like whether it's a sniff port or a not sniffed. In that case, when we apply any L7 only deny rule, it is always denying, and it shouldn't deny. It's a bug. So anyone has any question on this till this point? Okay. So we are proposing a change in Istio. So whenever we create a TCP filter, we shouldn't apply the pure L7 rules. So let's say pure L7 rules, which I have showed in the example one. So let's say if a rule has something like this, just request principal or method, we shouldn't add this kind of rule in the TCP filter config. If we do that, if we do not apply these kind of rules in the TCP filter, then the TCP ports won't be blocked by this. And there are few documentation changes required for this. Since we are making this change, probably there might be some users who would be affected, so we should add this kind of scenarios in the documentation, and we should like guide our users on this. Okay, so anyone has any question?
To confirm, if the port is auto sniffed,
Mhm.
or it's sniffed, not auto, if it is sniffed, we are certain that it's not going to be classified as TCP with any input that is HTTP. So we'll never, so it's not going to time out. It's not going to misclassify anything. It's HTTP is going to go to treat it as HTTP no matter what.
Yes, yeah. So if the auto sniffing finds the port as a HTTP, then we shouldn't that shouldn't be affected. That will use the HTTP filter that has a separate case, and we are not like making any changes there.
No, my concern was that if some attacker can generate a request that will be HTTP, maybe treated by application as HTTP eventually, but from the point of view of the sniffer, it will look like TCP. So the sniffer will you have capital P, lowercase o, capital S, or some combination with backspaces or whatever it is, that will not look like HTTP from the point of view of sniffer. So sniffer will say, hey, this is an TCP, apply the TCP rules, go to the application, but the application HTTP parser, which is more tolerant, probably, would say, hey, this maybe it looks like HTTP. I mean, I expect HTTP. I'm going to be as tolerant as possible and parse the input as, maybe it has 5 extra words in the request line instead of 3, but the caller will treat it as will still recognize it, basically. Java or whatever implementation is more tolerant than the sniffer in how it detects.
Okay,
I think that was the concern that John had from the beginning with sniffer. So we need to be 100% sure that sniffer will never misclassify. That's really.
Yeah, I would agree. I have major concern with that as well. But then, I don't know, like my thought process, okay, we can't have it apply to sniffing because that makes sniffing like this highly secure aspect. And then, so it's like, okay, we only do it on explicitly TCP ports, but then we have this really weird difference of behavior of explicitly declared ports and sniffing, which seems wrong as well, which then leads me back to the current behavior being correct. So,
well, I mean, it's clearly not correct to deny, MySQL request because someone has said design post. But if the port is clearly TCP, I think we can all, hopefully you can agree that it's not correct behavior. There is no sniffing involved. There is no risk involved because there is nothing that will treat it as HTTP. But if it is sniffed, then I agree with you. Then there is a risk that sniffer will misqualify it and introduce a security bug.
Yeah,
so I guess there's 3 extremes here.
Yeah, I think the rule of thumb of authorization policies it should be very explicit and clear. So if the deny policy says, if this condition match, then deny, then we should follow that. So only if we see the exact match, then we will deny the traffic. Otherwise, it should not affect the traffic. I think that's the thing I'm proposing. We should follow this rule. The current behavior is if we cannot tell the protocol whether or not it's match or not, we always deny, and that part is wrong. That's the thing we're trying to fix.
Yeah, but we should still verify the sniffer. I mean, if we need to confirm that the sniffer it's as tolerant as possible, basically.
It's not.
Yeah. That part
by definition can't be. Because
for
the issue. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, John. Finish.
Okay, fine. I was going to say, I think by definition it can't be. Every auth bug we get is basically a mismatch of Envoy versus the application. And I refuse to believe that we could ever create a sniffer that's actually accurate because there's applications that will parse the craziest things as HTTP that are very tolerant. Where Envoy is pretty strict. So they say, that's not HTTP, but the backend does, and then we're screwed, right? So I don't think it's not that it had to be implemented. It's something that is not secure by design almost.
John, I have a question. And how often we do this? Like the sniffing doesn't work properly?
Whenever someone attacks us, basically. So whenever an attacker read the employee code, figure out what we do with sniff, and then craft a request that is not going to be treated as HTTP. And I'm sure someone who reads the employee code can go to the code and craft such request in such a way that it's actually accepted by Python, Java, PHP, or whoever it's parsing HTTP.
Yeah, the problem is that not everyone implements HTTP the same way. So Envoy could look at it and think that's not HTTP. I could look at it and say that's not HTTP, but some backend could be like, whatever, I don't care that it's spelled HTTP instead of HTTP or something. Fine, that's close enough, and accept it, right? And then there's a CVE. So that's, that's why right now we have like, yes, we are incorrectly denying things, but at least when we're wrong, we're denying traffic instead of allowing it. So
how about a middle ground solution where we continue to do what we are doing for anything that has sniffing, but if the user is explicit and say, hey, this is my SQL port, I'm clear that it's not going to be TCP, I don't have a TCP parser, then there is no point to denying it, because the user explicitly tell us that even if the request is post, because it's my SQL parser that is processing the request, they are not going to be affected by this.
Okay, so Costin, you're proposing we shouldn't make any changes for the sniff ports where we're using auto sniffing?
Yes, I think, I mean, unless we are 100% sure that the sniffer is 100% accurate and will never misclassify, then it's probably not safe. We'll have a CV if someone is, I mean, it's a clear attack. I mean, I can, write the attack myself probably.
I want to comment on this point. So I think if customer really worry about the security, they should actually make a deny by default. So if there's anything, we cannot make decision, it should always be denied. And and right now, the security best practice is if you want to enable deny by default, just apply any allow rule. I think that's the recommendation. That's how you enable deny by default. And for auto sniffing, can we have clear documentation saying which protocol we are supported and which we cannot, auto sniffing cannot work correctly? Like cannot make the 100% decision.
In our
because security cannot be waived, right?
Yeah, in our documentation, we claim that HTTP and HTTP2 are supported for auto sniffing, but it seems like we have a bug for auto sniffing. Basically, you can somehow bypass, even though you are HTTP protocol, but somehow you can bypass the auto sniffing as a different protocol, right? So that's, I think, the bug Costin is talking about. In current behavior I tested is if you are HTTP, then you will be denied based on the rules. But it seems that is not reliable. You can somehow impersonate it as a different protocol.
Limin, I have a question on deny by default. Like, since you're mentioning deny by default, like if we go ahead with that, what could be the use of deny policies then?
The use of deny policy is to explicitly deny.
No, so okay.
So if some condition match, then it's denies.
Yeah,
but deny by default is if there's no rule allows it, then it's denied. I think actually my ideal situation is whenever there is an authorization policy, it should always deny by default. But okay, I think we already, but right now we already have a supported rule is if there's only deny policy, it's actually allowed by default. But only if you have allow policy, then it becomes deny by default. If we want to continue supporting this behavior, then we can ask customer always add some allow policy. Like they can simply say allow, allow only if you have like a valid principle.
Yeah. So
something like this.
For this case, so let's say you're saying if we have a deny policy and if there is no allow policy, that should be denied by default, right? For all the other cases. Then what is the use of deny policy which we are applying first? Because anyway, user have to apply the allow policy. If they just have allow policy, that all the requests will be denied. So deny by default is already working. So there is no use of deny policies in that case, right?
No. Deny policy has higher priority. So if you have both allow and deny will always be evaluated first.
Okay, like that.
Yeah.
Going back to what Costin said, to rehash, Costin was saying that if you explicitly declare your port, it shouldn't apply. I almost agree. My only difference would be that I feel like two things. One is that we can't look at this in a vacuum. We have an existing config. And so I'm actually pretty against making any changes to the existing API in general, even if they're good changes. But aside from that, it does seem like the protocol declaration impacting auth Z is like, it does make sense kind of, but it's also fairly implicit. But I do agree with the concept. Like if you say this is TCP, then why bother with the rules? But I would prefer it to be in the rule itself and add a field that says when protocol equals HTTP, deny GET request. And the reason I like that is it's a lot more explicit, and most importantly, it's not a breaking change. There's no behavior change for existing users. Otherwise, if we want to do this, I feel like we need to do it along like a breaking change moment. Like if we switch over to the gateway API or something, then we can change behavior. Or if we, I don't know, do some other breaking change in Istio, we can do it at that time. Otherwise, it's kind of tricky.
Do we always have the protocol information? Like if we add a protocol field, saying protocol equal to HTTP.
It doesn't help in any way, John, because again, we have the sniffer. You say protocol HTTP, sniffer believe it's TCP, sends it to application using TCP rules because you have application HTTP. So the protocol is HTTP, and then we are back to square one.
That's a good point. Yep.
But I want to point out the reason we need to fix this is that it can cause outages. I mean, we are in a situation where user has perfectly happy cluster, everything works. Suddenly there is a denial of service, which is kind of the main reason for deny. Deny is primarily intended when you have a denial of service or a query of debt or some queries that you believe that it's causing problems. You add quickly a deny rule for that HTTP rule, and suddenly all your TCP services stop working. Even if you were careful, labeled all the services and put protocol TCP and everything else, but that really kind of super scary because customers, that's what I will typically do if I see a query of that. I add a deny rule.
And to answer John's question on the API changes, so let's say if we make changes for the raw TCP ports, I don't think we will be breaking any user in that case, because if they have this kind of condition, this kind of scenarios already present in their workloads, then the TCP traffic is already blocked, right? So they might be having the better policies for the TCP workload. So we are not touching them. We are just upgrading the kind of policies they are applying.
Yeah, Lee.
I just have a question on the defaults. Since you guys are talking about the defaults with denying all, users still have to manually apply the deny all authorization policy for deny all to be happening. Is that correct?
No, they need to just apply a deny post.
Deny what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last word.
Deny post request. So you say deny get or deny post with URL equal /evil request. When you add this HTTP deny rule, all TCP ports will be automatically denied with the current implementation. That really is a problem.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
not
so
deny all. Yeah, it's just to deny a particular traffic.
Okay, because I'm thinking about like in the zero trust sense, right? We basically you want to deny everything possibly, and then you kind of explicitly allow things as you needed to, right? So you want to be extremely explicit if you can. So in that sense, you would still deny, like you would have a blank deny statement to pretty much deny everything. And then let's say if your service A needs to talk to service B, whether it's on TCP or HTTP, then you would build a very specific authorization policy to only allow, if it's only allow GET requests, but not post or delete, then you would be like really explicit. And if it's layer 4, you would also be very explicit on what's allowed, and everything else should be denied.
That's not the current implementation. The current implementation is by default is open. So basically, you don't need to define a allow policy before the two services can talk.
Yeah, Lin, so right now the design is we have the implicit enablement for authorization policy. Before you apply any authorization policy, all the traffic goes through. But once you start applying allow policy, it should be denied. Then deny by default behavior kicked in. Yes, we also have the situations that if there is only one allow or one deny policy, there is no other allow policy. Actually, my ideal scenario is in this case, it should also be denied by default. But I think there are also arguments like the current behavior is actually, if there's only deny policy, it's actually allowed by default. So if the deny policy does not match, then everything is still the old behavior is allowed. It's like a no authorization policy applied.
I think
Does
the case
that make
here,
sense?
yeah. So Limi, the case here is you only have one deny rule, deny policy. So basically, if that doesn't match, it should be allowed, right? Because you don't have multiple.
That's the
yeah.
That's the existing behavior. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. If everybody thinks it makes sense, then yeah, I think we should just keep the behavior.
So Livin, ask on the chat, is allowed take precedence? So if I have allow,
no, deny takes precedence.
Okay, so it doesn't change anything. Users will just need to do an extra step and put allow star. So it doesn't really help in this case, because first of all, we would break users, and second, even if we make this change, users will have to go and modify their policies to add an allow all. But we are back to square one, because when they do deny port, deny post, we still deny TCP and
Yeah. I'm just I just want to answer Lin's question. Lin said if the ideal case is everything is denied by default. So I'm saying there's one exception today is if you only have one if you only have deny rule, there are no other rules, then it's allowed by default.
Yeah, but if you have one allow rule, then it's only allow whatever it's allowed.
Yeah, once you have allow rule, then it's denied by default.
Okay.
Which makes sense in a way, because again, you don't put any rule, probably your intent is not to not have any track. I mean, it's kind of
yeah. I hope it's not confusing.
Yeah.
If it is, let us know.
By the way, in today's product Istio product security meeting, we are also going through this topic to discuss whether allow the change the behavior for auto sniffing port to allow the TCP is acceptable, or it will not cause the security vulnerability. Because right now the behavior is if you can't sniff the traffic, it will be denied. But in this proposal, it will be changed to be if you can't match the deny rule, then it will be allowed. For example, for TCP, it doesn't match the deny HTTP rule, then it will be allowed.
How about we split the problem in two? I mean, one is the sniffing behavior, which is controversial. We need to do an additional digging to confirm that the envoy sniffer is 100% reliable, and probably to not be. But the other part is if the port is explicitly declared.
Yeah,
Can
I
we
agree.
get consensus that we move forward with making the change for explicitly declared port? So at least people who are conscious and also the documentation to always add the port in any deny rule, because that's the other thing that users can do that to avoid this problem.
Yeah.
And leave sniffing for next release maybe, or until we have more data.
Yeah, I agree. I think the second part, the first case is very clear. It's a bug. The second one, because the auto sniffing doesn't work reliably, it's kind of causes concerns on it may cause security vulnerabilities. So yeah.
And frankly, if a user, is security conscious and it's going to the trouble to put policy rules and have authorization policies, probably it's very reasonable to ask them to label their ports and not rely on guessing. Because again, you write policy rules, you cannot kind of depend on guessing. It's not the most secure posture to guess if it's TCP or HTTP and apply policies.
That's right. We can write some security best practice to ask users to explicitly follow the port naming to declare the protocol for the ports. So then it will go through the raw TCP ports, right? So if it's really raw TCP ports, you should declare it as a raw TCP ports. Then it will not be denied with the change of after the bug is fixed here.
Okay. So just to conclude the point with what Costin made, so basically for the ports which doesn't require any kind of sniffing, we should update it. It shouldn't deny always. And for the ports where sniffing is required, probably that could, like, the HTTP one would be treated as a TCP. In that case, we cannot do it. So we shouldn't change the behavior in that case, right?
Yep. Maybe Warren put some Istio validation or put some logs
Yes.
but keep the behavior as it is today, because again, the sniffing is dangerous.
Okay, and one more thing.
Oh,
So,
wait. So, yeah.
would you think this could be confusing? Sorry, Levin. Would you think this could be confusing for the users, because like we have two different scenarios now?
Yeah, I think we should have consistent behavior whether or not sniffing applies.
But we cannot have consistent behavior because the envoy behavior is different. I mean, in one case, envoy will always treat it as TCP, and the user told us there is no HTTP on that port. I mean, we know that it's not HTTP because the user explicitly declared it. Or in the other case, it's a guess. So it's not the same thing to guess and to have a clear indication of the protocol.
Yeah, but
in ideal world, I agree, Limin, that we should have the consistent behavior. But right now, it seems the auto sniffing doesn't work consistently. But we can maybe put this as a long-term goal, maybe fixing the this auto sniffing part. But I guess right now it's kind of raises the controversy on this part.
Yeah, I just feel it's really confusing if you like the sniffing result, probably user cannot tell what will be the result of sniffing, then they cannot really tell what will be the authorization outcome. And that will be dangerous, right?
But they somehow have a way to impersonate as a different protocol, right? So attackers somehow, even though it's HTTP, but somehow it has a way to bypass the sniffing. For example, I guess Kostin mentioned a few ways. So I guess that raises some security concern. But I agree the behavior should definitely be consistent. I think we internally go through this, in a separate meeting, but. Marco, please.
Yeah, I don't think that's what we agreed on. I think the consensus was that if the authorization policy touched HTTP, and it shouldn't affect the TCP filter chain. It's separate from auto sniffing, right? The auto sniffing shouldn't decide how the policy works, right? If we agree that HTTP fields only touch HTTP filter chain, then that's it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that was
But
that should be the expected behavior.
But the problem is the auto sniffing for auto sniffing ports, right? This doesn't, it can't tell whether it's really raw TCP or HTTP. The attacker can send HTTP traffic, but somehow the envoy think, oh, this is raw TCP. Then it bypass the deny rules. It basically can get passed through. I think that's the concern here.
No, the deny, so that if the deny says I only care about this HTTP traffic, then only if it matches, then it denies. Otherwise, it should not affect other traffic.
No,
but if auto sniffing has problem, maybe we should. One is documentation. The other is saying, you should follow the best practice. Should not apply the authorization policy for this kind of auto sniffing traffic. And there's one more way they can prevent passing through is to add one general allow policy, which is to make the traffic deny by default.
I mean, whatever we are doing is not going to fix sniffing. I mean, the problem with sniffing is that sniffing is used as a security feature to decide if it apply HTTP rule or apply TCP rules. And since it's not accurate, it will misclassify, and the application will still receive HTTP requests, and then we believe that it's TCP requests. So there is no way, it doesn't matter what policy we are putting, as long as sniffing is replaced with this behavior of, kind of treating it as HTTP or TCP, even if it's the opposite, we still have a security or CD. So there is no way to.
So are you saying when sniffing is applied, we should always deny? Or we should always have to deny by default? Is that the recommendation?
I think sniffing is extremely dangerous, and it's perfectly fine to
Yeah.
keep the current behavior of deny by default.
So why don't we say if sniffing is used, then customer should always have deny by default rule?
Sounds reasonable.
No, I mean, customer should always add a allow policy to make it deny by default.
But we cannot change because it's in production. So we can change a bit the behavior to what is happening today, but we cannot ask them to add additional rules. It's not practical.
This could be added in an analyzer as well for visibility to users.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime users have sniffing and they have authorization rules, we warn them that they don't go together, security and sniffing.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they explicitly follow the port naming scheme to declare as raw TCP port, then it will not have this issue. They will not go through the auto sniffing, port. Yeah.
So one more question: do we expect that users to always add the protocol, like the port naming?
We can provide such best practice guidance, but whether they will actually follow that, that's a separate issue, right?
If we warn them and and we analyze them and everything else it's in place, hopefully they will use. I mean, if we have clear warnings that if you use sniffing and security, something will go wrong, I guess they will label the port and get extra benefits, because if we don't have to generate the sniffing, we kind of simplify the config. We have less work to do. It's probably faster. There is no incentive to. I mean, the only reason to use sniffing is you are completely lazy and you just want telemetry to have to work without any configuration out of box. But once you start putting policy rules and using these two APIs, then the purpose of just lazy everything works kind of goes away, because you already write complicated policy rules that you need to understand.
Yeah, I agree. Like we should pass a message like sniffing and security wouldn't work like as predicted. And the thing is, my only concern is, since we are making changes for the non-sniffing port and we are not making changes for the auto sniffing, so this could like create more confusion among users, and we will see a lot of issues on GitHub and everywhere, probably on this, and we will just have to tell them every time.
What confusion would be? I mean, right now, if they apply the deny rule, all the TCP traffic will stop even if it's declared TCP. After the fix, it will work as intended, I mean, as expected.
Yes, but for the auto sniffing ports,
It's broken as it is today. So it's not. It was broken as it is today. So we are not making it worse than it is today.
Okay.
We're making strictly better for all users.
Okay, sounds good.
Not perfect, but a bit better than what it is today. I mean, at least if you declare MySQL, you will not be broken by an HTTP rule.
Okay, I agree with that.
Yeah, why don't we say some of the protocol is not supported for auto sniffing?
That's very reasonable as well. That's very reasonable as well. It's more clear, actually.
Yeah, if we say we only support the protocol that we can determine on, then we don't need to have different behavior for auto sniffing versus the normal. Yeah.
But we still need to do something for existing users. So if some user has auto sniffing and has, I mean, we cannot break them. We can document that is not supported. We can warn them in Istio cattle, but we cannot make a backpart incompatible change. I mean, this is okay to make because it's more tolerant. It's actually fixing something that is a arguably clear bug where a MySQL is blocked when it shouldn't.
Yeah, I agree. Like users can like make it work without defining the protocol as well. And if we just have these both scenarios, if we expect both scenarios work as similar, then that would create a problem. Okay, so yeah, I will go with the first draft, probably like add one more section for the auto sniffing, and it is working as fine right now. We shouldn't make any changes for that. Good.
So we end up with two different behavior for for auto sniffing versus non-auto sniffing.
It's one behavior for the declared ports, and for auto sniffing, as we suggested, we are going to say that is not supported. But for backward compatible, we skip blocking, because not supported also means that if you have a deny rule, blocking it because it's not supported, which is exactly the current behavior today. So we could say today is not supported.
Guys, I have to leave this room.
Okay.
We are good. Do you guys have any other questions? Sorry.
Yeah, I still feel it's quite confusing if we are saying, yeah, not supported means deny, then it's basically deny rule takes effect, right?
If you find that any solutions that will work properly with sniffing, then I'll be happy to, we can fix it in a separate release. So this release, we fix it, we declared ports, and if someone finds the solutions that will work properly with sniffing, we can fix it later as a second PR. But I don't know any solutions that will work since.
So are we going to change the behavior like HTTP field will affect TCP for the chain, or keep the current behavior?
Only for sniffing. So current behavior for sniffing and fixed for TCP.
So we will have the current whatever the implementation we have right now. We will keep this for the auto sniffing, but for the ports which is defined by user, we are gonna change it from the current implementation, right?
Yeah, costing. If we are saying auto sniffing authorization policy is not supported, then not supported means we are not having authorization policy in the place. Does not mean authorization policy will automatically take effect, actually deny the traffic.
Again, it's shipped, it's beta, we cannot change behaviors that drastically between releases. So you have an auto sniffing in previous release, it took effect for HTTP if you actually have HTTP, and then suddenly it doesn't. So it's too dangerous to make. I mean, it will break, it cause outages. I mean, that people may rely on this and say suddenly their policy disappears, that's bad.
But question, I have a question. Do you think this is our issues that users are not explicitly defining the protocol and somehow their HTTP ports are not treated as HTTP in auto sniffing? This is users' fault, right? Because they are not defining it.
No, it's not user's fault, it's an attacker fault. I mean, attacker crafts a request that is tricking the sniffer, and then it's bypassing the policies. So, and we don't have any way to avoid this, since you cannot make the sniffer to be 100% accurate.
Yeah. Okay. In that case, like we should deny it then. Probably like it's better to deny it.
Until we find a way to make the sniffer bulletproof. Because, for example, if the sniffer was just extracting telemetry without changing the protocol handling, maybe it would work. I don't know. Sniffing has a lot of problems.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, just to conclude, like for sniffing, we don't need to make any changes. Whatever the current scenario is, it is good. We are denying everything. For the cases of not sniffing, where like the users have explicitly defined their ports, in that case, we can change it and we shouldn't deny based on the L7 rules.
Yeah, and also update the documentation and also recommend people to put port in and all deny rules. So yeah, because that's another way to avoid the problem and all the things we discussed in the talk.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, guys, I think we're running out of time. Aryan, can you maybe write a summary? I think what you summarized just now is really good. If you can put in the meeting minutes, really appreciate that.
Sure, we'll do that.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining.
Cool. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.